This is the Thoughtful Travel Podcast. I'm your host, Amanda Kendall of the notaballerina.com travel blog. Every episode I'll share travel tales from several fellow travel lovers, and together we hope to entertain and inspire you, remind you of some of your own great travel experiences, and encourage you to hit the road again soon. Hello and welcome to episode 79 of the Thoughtful Travel Podcast. It's a special episode because it's the last episode for 2017. I'm going to have about a month off over Christmas and New Year. Got lots of guests and interviews and lots of stuff to get ready for next year. But I'm going to have a few weeks off to celebrate Christmas and enjoy some summer weather here in Perth. And of course it's the long summer school holidays, so I'll have my 7-year-old assistant at home as well. I'll have to get him back on the podcast soon. Perhaps that can be one of our summer projects. He hasn't been on since he was Mr. 6, so maybe it's time. Anyway, today's episode is about cultural differences around the world. So I've got some really interesting ideas coming at you today. But before we get to that, I do want to say two things. First of all, a huge thank you for listening to me throughout the year. I appreciate hearing from people so much when I hear, they've enjoyed the podcast, and it's, that's the reason I do it. It's so lovely to get that positive feedback. Of course, it's just fun to create as well. But thank you very much for spending the time to have me in your ears. And also, I want to just give a quick shout out to the lovely people who came along to the first ever Thoughtful Travellers meetup last week. It was, a couple of weeks ago by the time this comes out, but it was so much fun. We had about a bit over 25, not sure, between 20 and 25 people come along. We were in a venue in North Beach here in Perth, and we had a really fun travel quiz. If you don't know what a Milo dinosaur is, only one person at our quiz did, and she was part of the winning team. No surprise there. And a big shout out to Kelly, who was probably the champion of the quiz, and her team she was also in this winning team. Anyway, the quiz was fun, and then I had two great guest speakers. I'm so thankful for them. So, in fact, I'm going to get them on the podcast itself again soon too. And then we just had lots of fun catching up, meeting people and talking travel. So thank you very much to the attendees of the Thoughtful Travellers meetup. We're going to do it all again sometime next year as well. Anyway, on to cultural differences around the world. I am constantly surprised by, especially sometimes the very small things which are culturally very different. I think I've mentioned in an episode a while back that I was surprised to discover there were so many different ways to wash the dishes. And I have a couple of posts on my blog about washing the dishes in different countries because it's a topic that's come up for discussion so many times. Who would have thought? And my first guest today has a few of those kind of cultural differences as well. It's Reeva Cutting from the blog Proudly South African in Perth. So her blog name gives it away. She is South African, but she now lives here in Perth, Australia. And so we talked about some of the cultural differences between South Africa and Australia. And in case you are not from the Southern Hemisphere, or in fact, I'm not even sure where they use this word, but we call the thing you push around in the supermarket a trolley. And I believe in North America, you would consider it a shopping cart. And we do talk about trolleys in this chat. I know, who would have thought there's a cultural difference in trolleys apart from the word? But if you are confused, that's what we mean. We might mean a shopping cart. So here's Reeva.
For me, the biggest culture shock, probably more so when we moved to the UK, because that's when I first left South Africa, was having to put petrol in my car. And so a lot of South Africans moving to Australia will probably have the same experience that I had, where you just don't do it and you find other people to do it for you. So my boyfriend at the time, I just made him put petrol in all the time, and I just used to be like, here are the keys, you go do it. And eventually he was like, no, you're going to get out the car and you're going to put petrol in. I was just terrified. And I actually made my friend do it the other day. She was visiting from Spain, and I was like, do you want to put petrol in the car? And she was like, yes, oh my god. So she jumps out the car and she's like, what do I do, what do I press? So I was giving her all the instructions. I even took photos of her putting the petrol in the car because it was such an exciting moment. And I think most South Africans are pretty pretty excited the first time they put petrol in.
I was shocked because you told me this earlier, and you've got a blog post that you wrote about it. It's amazing to me.
Exactly.
It never occurred to me, but in retrospect, I can see why. And I love your blog post has detailed instructions so that you don't make
because you need them.
And you're right, because there are a lot of things that can go wrong.
There are, and they have gone wrong for me, which is why I wrote about them.
Yeah, so, I totally understand.
So here in Australia, I bet not many Australians know this. When you don't put the handle of the hose back into the slot correctly, an alarm goes off, and the people inside the shop will announce over the tannoy, "Number 8, put your pump back on," or whatever they say, and it is so embarrassing. And at first, of course, I didn't even know they were talking to me, so I was just whatever.
Yes, what are they shouting about?
Something. And I was like, "Oh, that's mine."
Hilarious.
So I thought some instructions for people would help, hence the blog post.
Yes.
And it is a pretty popular blog post. People do read it, and whenever I share it on social media, people do comment on it. So
well, it reminds me, I've got this very popular blog post about washing dishes in Australia because people from other parts of the world think that we wash our dishes in a very unhygienic way.
Yes,
and
which we've discussed, and I think this is really bizarre because I'm not sure how else you're supposed to wash dishes.
Well, have a look at my blog post because people have a lot of opinions about how you should wash the dishes.
Yeah.
So, but yes, it's one of those that's fascinating to me about cultural differences that you just don't realise until you're in that situation or you happen to talk to someone about it. So yes. What else have you noticed different between South Africa and Australia?
So one thing that I probably didn't notice straight away, but then it did kind of dawn on me, is that trolleys here are absolutely impossible to drive.
The trolleys.
I actually spoke to my husband about this because he's English, and he had no idea that there was any difference in trolleys around the world. So the UK trolleys appear to be the same as the Australian ones, but in South Africa we have trolleys where the front wheels and the back wheels are kind of locked together, so they all turn in the same direction at the same time, whereas in Australia each wheel goes its own way.
Yes, and usually in all 4 directions at once.
Exactly,
and you crash into people,
if you've got an
crash
incline,
into the shop, into the aisles.
So if the road is bumpy or downhill or uphill, and you've got a Ford trolley, it is impossible to push, and you end up having to push it sideways, and you can actually feel your back.
Yes. My physiotherapist has specifically said to me, trolleys are like the devil to a physiotherapist. So
but there is actually an alternative.
I know. Why don't we have them?
I don't know. Maybe somebody should bring them to Australia. They would make a fortune.
It's a new business idea.
Yes.
Proper trolleys. Yeah. South African trolleys.
So South African trolleys is the one thing that people always crop up about. That's what they miss.
It's so funny. Yes. It's almost like BYO trolley. You can put that in your immigration advice. Pack your own and take it to the shops with you.
Oh God, if only you could.
Wouldn't that be? Yes, I want one now. I'm going to go to South Africa specifically to see the trolleys.
Also, we have trolleys in South Africa that have like baskets in them. So they're like a mini trolley with a base where you put a basket in.
Oh.
So there's no basket, like a hand basket.
Yeah.
So you put one in the top and you can put one in the bottom. So if you don't want a lot of stuff, you just put your 2 baskets in your trolley. Then you don't have to carry the basket.
Yes.
And you can just push that. And they're really short because they're also like the width of the length of the basket. Yeah.
How come you guys got so good at shopping?
I don't know. Maybe because people spend lots of money. Who knows?
Oh, maybe. Who knows? Fascinating. Anything else?
Oh, there's tons. But let's focus on some of the bigger ones. So safety is a big thing, which is a big reason why people migrate as well.
Yes, tell me more about that, because I kind of know that it exists, but I've never really talked to anyone about it.
So one of the differences that you notice is that when you drive around streets in Australia, there's no fences at the front. And so in South Africa, most people will live behind walls or fences, and often those will even have barbed wire. My dad's house has got infrared laser beams all around the property that get set at night, so if anything goes over them, the alarms go off, which is impossible when birds fly into the garden.
I was just thinking about animals.
So sometimes you never even know if it's an intruder or if it's just a hide-out, which is fun. And then because of that, kids play in the street here.
Yes.
Obviously, if it's a busy street, not. But if but
like here,
suburbs,
I look out to the park and there's always kids out there,
and be able to play in South Africa. That's just not something. I mean, I didn't learn to ride a bike until I was 13.
Because there was nowhere to do it, really.
It was just wasn't something that you did.
Wow.
Yeah. And people walk everywhere here as well. You can walk around, and you can walk around alone at night. Generally.
Yes.
I mean, you have to be sensible and take precautions anyway.
Yes, I don't love walking alone at night, but it's not something probably nothing's really going to happen to me. Yeah.
So the safety's a big thing. And people are really friendly here, I find as well, like just in the stores. If you're in the supermarket. I remember the first time coming from the UK where everybody's so miserable as well. They barely even speak to you. In South Africa, they won't even say hello most of the time. and you come to Australia and the checkout person's like, oh, hi, how are you? How's your day? What are your plans? What are you doing on the weekend? And they'll chat to your child and have a little conversation. And just like, why are these people talking to me? Like, oh my God, why do they want to know so many things about me? And now I love it, you know?
Yes.
Because especially if you don't work and you come here as a new migrant, just to go and have somebody have a 2-minute conversation while they pack your shopping.
It really helps.
It connects you to somebody and makes you feel much more settled as well.
You know, I love that about Australia. When I lived in Germany, I had to adjust very quickly that no one in the supermarket was going to speak to me. Even if I tried, they just wouldn't speak back.
Yeah.
And it's just a cultural thing. It's fine. But when I came back, or each time I visited Australia, I just enjoyed it so much.
Yeah.
Because it was just, it is, you know, it's just friendly and nice. And
it is nice.
Yeah, I think that's
I remember the last time I was in a supermarket in South Africa, the woman she didn't say hello, obviously you don't expect that anymore, but she didn't even tell me how much my shopping cost. So she rang it all up and then she just sat there and looked at me. So I was like, how much is it? And she was like, oh, it's 50 Rand or whatever. I was like, thank you. Like, you can at least tell me what I have to pay you.
At least a transactional kind of discussion.
So that's kind of the difference.
Wow. Yeah, I can relate, as I mentioned in my chat with Reeva, to some of these differences too, particularly that in Australia people are almost overly friendly to people that they don't know, like the chat in the supermarket. I just remember when I lived overseas and I'd come back to Australia, and the first couple of times I'd go to a supermarket, I'd just kind of leave beaming because I'd had this lovely, like genuine chat with whoever was serving me. And that doesn't happen in a lot of countries. And I think some people who have grown up without that think it's kind of a waste of time because it's not someone you're going to see again, or they don't really mean it or whatever. But I think it really does perk up your day, like Reeva mentioned as well. I think that's, you know, I don't love everything about, you know, the typical Australian traits that we have, but that's one of the ones I really do like. So that's a good cultural difference. Now, my next guest is Luke Mackin, who's been on several times before, and you might remember that he grew up partly in the Philippines and then the States, if I remember correctly. But in essence, he's American, but now lives with his wife and young kids in Indonesia. And so his kids don't have much experience at all of their homeland of America. And we chatted about some of the big differences between life in rural Indonesia and back in the USA.
When we went back the first time, just how big everything is. Like the refrigerators, are just gigantic. And even just cups. Like cups are like giant bowls, like huge.
Yep.
Huge mugs, and everything in Indonesia is so much smaller. Portions at restaurants and things like that. Cars, everything is just so big. And so that was like, wow, that's quite different.
That's so true. But even for me as an Australian, I find that when I go to the US that everything is enormous.
Yeah. I'm sure we have that reputation also. And it's true. That is true. I think also, we live, like I said, in a really rural area. So there's a very isolated area. So there's a lot of poverty. And so going back to the States and, you know, maybe visiting someone's house and, you know, they may be like, oh, sorry, our kitchen is this way or that, you know, and it's like, this is amazing.
Yeah.
Like, this is huge and beautiful. And, you know, so it's always kind of like, I think people just don't realize how most of the world lives. And, the comparison between what we see every day and everything else in the States is quite stark. And so you kind of feel like, I don't want to say like guilty, but just this kind of,
it's uncomfortable.
There's this tension.
With
lots of stuff like that.
And imagine for your kids too. So they've only lived in Indonesia, right? So then to see the States is a real contrast to them. Yeah,
it is. I think they're pretty oblivious to a lot of stuff. They just grandpa and grandma.
Oh, that's nice. Yeah.
And eating sugary cereal and stuff like that. watching loads of TV.
So there's good benefits for them.
They get a little spoiled in the States, but so they love it.
Oh, that's excellent.
Another thing I remember is the stark difference in customer service. Like you could feel it, you know, we have to fly back and, you know, it's such a long route to London and to the States, and or the other way, Hong Kong. And whenever you switch airplanes, like the halfway point, you kind of move past an Asian airline and get like an American airline. And just how rude the flight attendants usually are, especially to foreigners.
Oh,
it makes
yes.
me feel like so ashamed. Like,
Yeah.
you know, there's like some Chinese old lady on the plane, and, you know, she doesn't really understand what they're saying, or and they're just like so sharp and like impatient with her.
Yeah.
And whereas like I'm treated so well on like the Asian airline, so patient, they're so kind to our kids. But once you switch over, there's just not as much patience and kind of a arrogance or something. I don't know, but it's it made me feel so bad for the foreigners, for the non, you know, second language learners or whatever.
Yes.
I feel ashamed. I feel really ashamed by that.
Yeah, I've had the same experience, and I guess a lot of it, well, I don't know, I've always thought a lot of it comes down to the fact that English speakers often don't speak any other languages, and they really don't understand what it's like to not be able to understand. And so they have no empathy and no sympathy, and they often come across as really rude. I agree. I remember back quite a few episodes in the early days of the Thoughtful Travel podcast, speaking with Adam Beck, who lives in Japan with his family, including 2 young kids. And they had the same reaction when they went back to the US and loved both seeing their grandparents and also having these amazing aisles of oversized supermarket food to choose from, which would be quite a difference compared to Japan as well. But I also wanted to say something else about how Luke's discussion or mention of people who are rude, rude, I can't say it any nicer than that, to people who don't speak their language. It really bothers me a lot, and I think it seems to be particularly bad in English-speaking countries because not so many people in English-speaking countries speak another language, and they can often get away with just using English. For example, I'll always remember when I moved back here to Australia from Germany with my then German husband. He's still German. And we would catch up with some friends, who were good friends of mine. I'd known them for a long time. They're lovely people, but perhaps this is just the way they were brought up because they didn't speak another language. And if we chatted to each other, in the corner of a room in German, people would say, "Hey, stop speaking German. What are you saying? Are you talking about us?" And they were otherwise perfectly nice people, but they just found it hard to be around people speaking another language. Whereas I think, like, if you grow up in Europe or in Asia, there's lots of other languages around you all the time. And so it's just seen as a completely normal thing. So, anyway, it's just something I wanted to get off my chest because it bothers me. All right, now my final guest today is James Thomas. Now, James lives in Taiwan these days, in fact, has for quite some time, and he runs a podcast about expat life. So he has a lot of experience, and we chatted about the cultural differences that he can remember from his experiences as well. You've been in Taiwan for quite some years, am I right, James?
Yes. I was educated in mainland China, from New York City.
Yep.
And I went to. I was an exchange student in Beijing, Beijing Teachers College, and studied Chinese history and language, and then got a scholarship to come out here and continue my language studies out here in Taiwan, which I'm just still out here today.
Excellent.
I've been out for 28 years, yeah.
Wow, that's amazing. Can you still remember what the main cultural differences are between the US and Taiwan/China? Or the most surprising things to you?
Wow, that's going to take some time traveling.
Yeah, I guess you've really assimilated in that time, but
yeah, it's like the way people address each other, the way they have a perception of the level of trust. People built up relationships in more so in mainland China, so they could have a future connection, or that they can possibly have access to, and less so in Taiwan because the U.S. had a military presence here. And a lot more people here in Taiwan locally had the opportunity at an earlier time to travel abroad or things like that, or maybe they have family already living abroad. So it's a lot to say. Wow, I need some deep time traveling for that. But leading up to today, times, of course, have changed, and China's become a very powerful neighbor. And there's still issues between Taiwan and mainland China today that hopefully will get resolved, but I don't think will get resolved anytime soon. And something as an expat we have to live with and try to stay aware of it and not necessarily get involved in what's going on.
Yeah, that's tricky, I suppose. It's hard to, I guess as an expat, is it almost incorrect to have an opinion on it because you weren't brought up there, or?
Well, it depends. Okay, you can look at it. If you have an opinion, if you hear in Taiwan about the relationship between the two, mainland and Taiwan, you can have your opinion, and you're less likely to have someone jump on you in a negative way. But you probably will be less inclined to do so in mainland China because of their hardcore beliefs on how they feel Taiwan is a part of their history and things like that. But I've studied, Chinese history, and I have my personal opinions about it. But I don't think it's my, how would you say, I don't think it's really my say to try to implement or try to force my opinion on either side. Of course, because I have friends on both sides. I just wish everybody, how would you say, Rodney King back in the United States would say, why can't we all just get along?
Yes, that would be nice, not just for China and Taiwan, but everywhere.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely. I used to teach English. I used to teach English here in Perth, and we would have both Taiwanese students and Chinese students in our classes, and usually a lot of students from Taiwan and then rarely someone from China. But there was some tense moments when they would get into, because the students from other countries around the world would ask them directly, what's this all about, right, this China-Taiwan thing? And yeah, it got a bit heated at times when they would discuss it. So it was interesting to observe.
It's interesting. How would you have to deal with that? I think I would know how to handle it. And I'm just waiting for the time when I do have to deal with it. I think I can deal with it quite well.
Yes. And you would have a lot more background than me, so that would make it easier. I used to let them kind of fight it out for themselves. I mean, it was just heated discussion. We'd have a lot of like South American students who were so passionate about everything that they would love. They would just ask question after question and want to know more and more, because they're very open people and, very always wanting to talk. So they would kind of quiz them quite deeply. But it was, they were all adults, and so they could kind of deal with it amongst themselves, and I would just sit back and observe. So, yeah, I mean, it was all in English, so it's good for their learning.
Correct English grammar, right?
Yeah, yes, exactly. Yes, as long as their grammar and vocabulary was perfect, all good. Oh, I remember those tricky days when I would have students on my class list from both Taiwan and China. I guess they're more political differences than cultural differences, but it was quite a tricky moment sometimes. I was always a little worried. It didn't happen too often, but anyway, interesting stuff from James. Now, that's it for episode 79 of the Thoughtful Travel podcast. So thank you very much for listening to the final episode of this year. You'll have to go back in the archives and listen to some of the past episodes you've missed to get you through, the Aussie summer and the northern winter. It'll just be a 4-week break, and then I'll be back with lots of new travel stories. But today, if you want to know more about your guests, my guests, the guests you've listened to, you can head to find out more about Reeva at Proudly South African in Perth. So she's at proudlysouthafricaninperth.com. And also has a really big Facebook group. So if you happen to be South African in Perth, that's something to look up on Facebook. And I will highlight the post she has about how to put petrol in your car, because it's something you wouldn't expect that you need to know. So it's quite endearing, along with my post about washing dishes in Australia. And all of the, you have to read the comments. Some people get quite irate about the unhygienic nature of how we wash dishes. After Reeva, I chatted with Luke Mackin, and he's from Wild Sumatra. So you can find him at wildsumatra.com, especially lots of amazing pictures of his beautiful corner of Indonesia. And last but very definitely not least, I chatted with James from 4 Seas, One Family, and you can find him at 4c's1family.com. I'll also leave a link to 2 previous episodes I've done about cultural differences. Episode 12 about culture clashes and episode 18 about cultural fusion and confusion. And of course, the show notes for this episode will be at notaballerina.com/79. Do come along and join us in the Facebook group. Lots of fun to be had there. It's called Thoughtful Travellers. So just look up Thoughtful Travellers on Facebook or hit the link in the show notes. Join me on Twitter at Amanda Kendall and use the hashtag ThoughtfulTravelPod, or follow me on Facebook at the Not a Ballerina page as well. Thanks again for listening all through 2017, and I look forward to having lots more to share with you in 2018. If you are celebrating, then have a fabulous, fabulous Christmas and a happy new year as well. This has been another episode of the Thoughtful Travel Podcast. Show notes and other information are at notaballerina.com/podcast. Join me again soon for another chat about why we travel. Bye for now.